Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Newfound Happy Hour. My name is Sarah. I am your host. And if you're watching on video, this first little intro and the end are not going to have video. I forgot to record that part when myself and Matt recorded the other day. So I feel like if you follow me on any social media, you know that I have been more political lately. And I don't even know if it's lately. I feel like I've always cared. But of course, with the political climate in the US and in Canada the past few years, it's it's very overwhelming. And I'm constantly torn between some people finding me annoying on social media, but then being informed and informing others, or like sharing perspectives on certain things. And I'm torn between that and then just like for my own sanity, not looking at certain things and trying to go about my own life and prioritize the good things that are happening. But then I feel guilty because there's so much happening in the world that, it's very overwhelming to think about. And I feel like there's a lot of people who feel the same way. Like, it's like, how do I be informed, but also not completely like ruin my mental health? And so we've seen what happened in the States. I don't mean to be such a Virgo right now, but like, I told you so. Like, anyone who thought that that wasn't going to happen wasn't paying attention, in my opinion. But that's a different conversation. I feel like whether you're super informed or you're not, I think a lot of Canadians and Newfoundlanders want to be more aware of what's happening. I learned that because we don't know this stuff. Like, I said to Matt, who we're going to talk to in a few seconds, that like I remember doing a fake class election in grade 5. I think in social studies in elementary school, I remember learning about like the different levels of governments, like municipal, provincial, federal. And then I don't think we learned anything else after that. If we did, it wasn't really focused on. And so I say this all the time as someone who had an accountant for a mother and an accountant for a best friend, and as someone who was a licensed insurance broker at one point, I knew that like all that stuff I learned was not common knowledge, and everything that my mother has taught me is not common knowledge. And there are only so many things that are inevitable in life. Like, so many things are uncertain, but the certain things are that every human on this earth will have to deal with taxes, and every human will have to deal with insurance, unless you aren't going to rent or own a house, or unless you aren't going to drive or own a car. So those two things are inevitable. And then the other thing is that we are all affected by politics, and currently we all have a right to vote. So on one hand, I feel annoying for talking about it, for being vocal about it, but at the same time, I cannot look back in 10, 20, 30 years and have my niece ask me what I did during this time and wish I had have done more. I think anyone who has kids probably feels the same way. And so, I just ultimately decided that I will be annoying and I will share the shit out of some things. And like we talk about in this episode, like obviously sharing certain things on social media, like you need to check what you're sharing and make sure it's factual. But what I've found lately that is so frustrating is someone will share a stat, but they're missing like the reasoning behind it. And so I find like what you get is just two people sharing things that are both correct, but the interpretation of it and the perception of it is misconstrued in one way or another. And it's very frustrating. And I find that anytime I've posted things lately, I've gotten a lot of messages being like, thank you for sharing this. This is so overwhelming. I didn't know this fact. I didn't know I could find this article on this website. And it kind of gives people a bit more, I don't know what the word is. It makes you a little bit more comfortable to look into it, because you see something on Instagram and then it's kind of overwhelming to like actually do research. And Matt talks about like what actual research is when you're looking into these things. But it is overwhelming. If you see something shared, like a tweet and information in a tweet, like it's time consuming to go look that up and find the articles that that those numbers are coming from or lack thereof. And I see a lot of people share things who have so clearly never had to write a research paper in their life. And like I don't like I think any post secondary you have to do that. I think we did research papers in high school. Like I wasn't a 4.0 GPA student, but I had to write a lot of research papers and I had to cite everything. And it seems so clear to me that a lot of you have not had to do that. Anyways, yeah, I just wanted to do a couple episodes on politics, but before I even talk about anything, I think it's important to understand how it works here in Newfoundland and how it works in Canada in general, because it is an election year. And so I put out some questions on my stories, just trying to find people who would be interested in talking about it, who had a working knowledge of it. And so today we're talking to Matt Babb. This interview is going to be on video, but yeah, I think it gives us a good starting point for trying to figure out what the hell is going on. So, yeah, here we go. Yeah, so like I said, everyone, I wanted to do an episode with someone who could give us some basic knowledge about politics here in Newfoundland and Canada. There's a lot going on right now, and people want to learn more and want to be involved, um, and don't know where to start. And so hopefully this episode can do that. So Matt, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Matt Babb. I am 28 years old this year. I work for our provincial government. I am what's called an executive assistant. I work for a provincial cabinet minister. I've been involved in the political process for better part of 13 years, almost 15 years. So I joined when I was in high school. Excuse me, apologies. And yeah, I've held a number of interesting positions over the years, and I've been involved in political campaigns at a federal, provincial, municipal level. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I'm definitely somebody who's seen a thing or two. So I guess let's dive right in.
Yeah, so for people who may not have any idea, um, I think a lot of us are taught, like I remember in elementary school kind of learning about like municipal elections, provincial. I remember learning who the prime minister was. I think we had a fake, well, I mean, we had a class president uh, election in our grade 5 class. But aside from that, I don't really remember learning much more about how politics works in Canada, in Newfoundland. So for Newfoundlanders going to the polls, going to a voting booth, what does that look like?
So the beauty of our country is that we have three levels of government. We have what's called municipal, which most people would know if you're in a town, city, or a municipality would be like your town council, city council. So if you're in St. John's, for example, St. John's City Council, which is led by His Worship and Mayor, there's a deputy mayor, and then there's nine other council members. There's four at large meaning the entire city of St. John's they represent. And then there's five wards. So Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4, and Ward 5. So Ward 1 would be like your East End area, like Stavanger, Carrick Drive, excuse me, Ward 2 will be your downtown core, so everything harbor up, and that's a long ward. If you actually look at the map, it's effectively the entire harbor front. It goes, well, you would say north to south if you actually do it properly on a map, but it's kind of east to west depending on where you're oriented. Ward 3 is, say, your university core right around Empire Avenue up to Kenmount Terrace. Ward 4 is your east end or is your west end ward, and then Ward 5 is the Goulds, Kilbride, Shea Heights. So that's a bit of a modified system because most town councils would be all at large, basically. So you'd have set council, let's say five, for example, and then each person would represent an at large. So they represent the entire town in theory. So anybody in the town, no matter where they live, would be represented by any of those councilors. So that's your municipal system. Your federal system which is effectively the same as your provincial system, is based on what's called Westminster. So that's basically out of the United Kingdom for long story short. And how that works is it's based on confidence of the House. So the House is your legislature. So provincially, it's called the House of Assembly, HOA. So the elected officials in that House are called members of the House of Assembly. Each province has a different term. Generally, like if you're in Nova Scotia, it's MLA, member of the Legislative Assembly, effectively the same thing. If you're in Ontario, it's member of provincial parliament, so you're an MPP. And then federally, it's a House of Commons, so you're a member of parliament. Not a member of the House of Commons, member of parliament, because that is parliament, same thing. So how that system works, I said it's based on confidence. So when I say confidence, let's just use the provincial House, for example. There's 40 seats in the House. So in order to form government, you need to have what's called plurality of seats, meaning most seats in the House. If you have the most seats, but your party does not form a majority, meaning you don't have your 21 plus, you have what's called a minority government, because while you do have the most seats, you don't have a overall majority of that legislature. So typically what that means is you have to see a lot of deal making done between parties, a consensus, negotiation. We had a minority situation in this province for the second time in our entire history, we can believe that, between 2019 and the 2021 provincial election. Federally, right now, we have a minority situation. And then obviously a majority government means that you hold the confidence of the House in a majority sense. You have over the majority number in the legislature. So provincially, we currently have majority government.
Yeah. So you have all of those elected, and then how does that determine who the premier is?
Yeah, so municipal is only at the municipal level. So that really has nothing to do with your premier. So premier is your leader of your provincial government. So in this case, our premier is Dr. Andrew Furey. And so he's the so so premier, if you I guess what's called premier. So premier is almost like a play on the French word. So you'd say so you're the first minister in your cabinet.
Mhm.
So that's essentially the premier. So to answer your question, municipally is a separate system. And what's interesting about municipal politics is that municipalities are actually created by the provincial government. Like there's a Municipalities Act that governs every municipality outside of St. John's. And then there's the City of St. John's Act, which governs the City of St. John's, being that it's our capital city, it's going to have a special designation. So, but to answer your question in a literal sense, how someone becomes premier is they're the leader of the party that wins the election with a plurality of seats, and they're able to hold the confidence of the House. So when I say confidence isn't just winning every piece of winning every vote. It's basically winning votes that are confidence votes, and confidence votes are money votes. Like for example, a provincial budget every year, that's a confidence vote. So
Mhm.
if a government loses a confidence vote, it means that election has to be called, generally speaking. There are some nuances, but for the sake of simplicity,
Right.
that's generally how it works.
And what do we know about the next election cycle in Newfoundland? It seems like there's a lot happening right now.
Yes, there's a lot happening. So this is an election year in Newfoundland and Labrador, literally, because there's actually three elections that are happening this year. So so Canada as a country has fixed election dates, meaning that no matter when the election is called, there's going to be a fixed election date for when the term ends. So that falls in October of, in this case, 2025, because our last election happened in 2021. Provincially, we also fall under provincial fixed date legislation. So the funny thing is that because what basically happens is that back when we had our 2015 provincial election, that was supposed to be in 2014. So our fixed election date would not have been the same year as the provincial election or as the federal election, but it happened in 2015, meaning that they're on the same cycle. So technically speaking, the federal election and the provincial election, if the two respective governments go the full term, meaning they go to it and they have to go into this writ period, because the thing about governments are they hold the power that they can call an election at any time. They will both be in October. So provincially, we have a clause that if the federal election is falls on the same year, our writ period is going to be in November, which is what happened in 2015. So we had an
Mhm.
October 2015 election, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was elected with a Liberal government majority, and then Premier Dwight Ball was elected in November with a provincial Liberal majority government. So that's how the federal and provincial ones work. In theory, you're going to see if the feds go the full term, they're going to go in October because we obviously concede to them. And then provincially, we're going to go in November. But the kicker is that because municipal elections are governed by the provincial government's Municipalities Act and the City of St. John's Act, they happen every 4 years. There's no early election calls unless there's a by-election, meaning if someone who was elected in the previous cycle vacates their office early for whatever reason is called. They're happening typically it's September 31st, but because that is now a federal mandated holiday, it's National Reconciliation Day.
Hmm.
They're having October 2nd is going to be the municipal election. So in theory, if everything goes full term, voters in Newfoundland and Labrador, whether you're in St. John's, you're in Port aux Basques, or you're up in Labrador, are going to have to vote municipally in October 2nd. They're going to have to vote provincially and federally all within that, let's say, 60-day window, if everything goes full term.
Okay, lots to think about.
Yeah, there's lots
Um,
to think about. And apologies, this isn't, I'm trying really hard to sort of explain this, but also providing context that's really important because there is a lot of nuance to this.
mhm.
So, like, this is a very colorful topic, to say the least.
Yeah, but it's good to know, and it's good to kind of have the basics before you think about who you're voting for and how it all works and making your plans to vote and all of that. Um, for anyone who does want to gain knowledge, like you said, we have those election dates coming up in the fall. How or what is the best way to figure out who's running, figure out who your options are, find out more about them? Do you have any advice on that?
Absolutely. So, because our beautiful and big and vast province has a lot of diversity of how people live, it really depends on where you're to. If you're in our capital city, the best indication is you're going to see signs everywhere. You're going to see municipal candidates with their signs. You see the 2x2s that you see on people's lawns, these 4x4s that almost look like a half a billboard with, let's say, for argument's sake, Matt Babb, vote Matt Babb, and the ward, if it's a ward election or at large or for mayor or for deputy mayor. If I was running provincially, you would see something like that, Matt Babb. Then you would see what party I'm running for and what the district is called, because there's a bunch of district names. Like if you're in the East End, there's Virginia Waters Pleasantville, there's Windsor Lake, there's St. John's East Kitty Vitty. So there's 40 provincial districts. And then federally, there's 7 ridings and same kind of thing. You have Matt Babb, let's say Matt Babb running for the Liberals. You might see a variation of that. If I'm running for Team Mark Carney,
Hmm.
insert whatever, because there's obviously lots of different parties. I mean, there's 3 main ones. There's the federal Liberals, which currently hold our minority government. There is the federal Conservatives, and then there is the New Democrats. There's also the Green Party of Canada that has run candidates this province before. There's Bloc Québécois, which while it is a federally represented party, it's a regional party that they only run candidates in Quebec, and there's lots of diversity of opinion there. So just the obvious buzz of an election is the easiest way. But if you're in a more rural spot, I will say limited experience because I'm towny, as you can tell. That's depending on the size of the community. A lot of it is word of mouth. Like if you're in a town of, let's say, Winterton, on the down by Carbonaire on the Trinity Bay to Ver Peninsula, basically,
Hmm.
that's going to be probably word of mouth. Like you might see people put up some signs, but it's mostly going to be people kind of going around talking at some local events, doing a bit of door knocking. Because that's the other thing too, right? Most campaigns do a variation of canvassing, which is knocking on your door, doing phone calls, depending if it's provincial or federal, doing advertisements, mail outs, you name it. There's lots of buzz if you want to be engaged, I guess is my point.
Hmm. Right. And do you have any suggestions for, because there is a lot out there on social media, um, some of it is true information, some of it's misinformation. Do you have any tips on what to look out for in terms of those things?
The best piece of information is if you read on social media, it's probably not true. I mean, reasonably, it's probably not true. Like, there's always a semblance of truth. That's how these misinformation and disinformation campaigns get you. Is they'll offer something that you might conventionally think, yeah, that's probably true. So then you're kind of bought into the concept, and then you keep reading, and then even if it gets a little bit out to lunch, I'll say, because you kind of already bought in, you can sort of believe there might be a degree of sensibility to it. So I would say if you see it on social media, at least look for a couple other sources.
Mm-hmm.
I always kind of, a lot of people like to say they do research, but I mean, which I think is a bit of a misnomer. Like people definitely look at things, but to
Mm-hmm.
do your own research, that actually implies a degree of commitment of going through source material, things that are peer reviewed. And obviously, I'm not trying to say that only people at an academic level can do research. I'm just saying that reasonably, you should always have a degree of questioning
Mm-hmm.
of stuff that you're reading, right? Unless you're getting it from several different instances and I know there's a lot of misinformation around like our public broadcast or CBC, but I mean, if you're fact checking by way of CTV, CBC, I mean NTV NewsHour, VOCM here at a provincial level, generally speaking, most places are carrying something. There's a semblance there. I think it's just keeping a healthy mind that there might be because at the end of the day, somebody's writing that, somebody's articulating that, just like people listening to this right now might say I'm full of it.
Mm-hmm.
Totally fair because obviously there's somebody putting a voice to it. So there is a degree of that person might have phrased something in a way that you wouldn't phrase it, and then that kind of changes the meaning for you. So a healthy dose of skepticism, I think, is important in today's day and age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I know lately, especially like with all the current politics, even in like the states and everything, I've really been more careful to, like, before I share something, to actually look into the truth a little bit more. Like if it's said that someone said XYZ, or if, this bill was proposed, like I'll actually go and find it and dig in a little bit more to really try and understand a bit more what it means, as overwhelming as that can be sometimes. But so basically, be careful before you share things and maybe look into the facts of what you're sharing first.
Oh, absolutely, and I think you have to ask the question. I guess going back to when you're doing grade 7, 8, or 9 English. When you're reading a story, you're reading some piece of media, or I guess now in the classroom you're observing a piece of media too, because you see a lot of that with movies and TV shows and podcasts, for example. Who's the individual saying what they're saying? What is their background? And why are they necessarily going about it this way? Right? They can see that a lot with if you watch American news, you watch like a CNN or a Fox News, and they have these paid
Hmm.
commentators that are coming on, there's clearly a bias. So, not saying there isn't the key I think is that there's a semblance to like there's a lot of stuff that people say that has a semblance of truth, and then that's how they get you. They bring you down into what they're pitching, and then you're locked in, and then soon you're repeating it back.
Right. Yeah. So I do always end with sharing advice. Before we do that, is there anything else that you think voters should be aware of, or that we should look into before the upcoming elections?
We obviously are increasingly becoming Americanized, right? Most of what we watch and observe is coming from American television, whether people watch CNN, as I said before, Fox News, MSNBC, NBC, you name it. Everything is very Americanized. And people, because that's the context in which they understand a lot of things, they always come at it from an Americanized angle. So people always think in terms of how US elections work versus, say, a Canadian federal election, which would be equivalent to a presidential election, equivalent in the sense they're at the same level of governing the country versus a state election, provincial being ours or territorial, and then obviously municipal. So people kind of attribute terms. Like, for example, the confidence is really the thing that I want to leave people with understanding. Like at the end of the day, a political party could have 20 different leaders that all become prime minister. But as long as that party maintains confidence, that government is legitimate. That's legitimate government elected by the people because you elect your local representative.
Hmm.
Now, is there an optics piece to a prime minister who's not an MP, for example, and governing? Yeah, of course there is. And that's healthy to question, uh, that you would like to see maybe an election call because you feel that there's important issues to discuss. But at the end of the day, terms like illegitimate and not legitimate it's not correct. That's not how our system works. That's not the spirit of our system. And people that are perpetuating that want to create chaos and they want to perpetuate a position. And usually the position is, I'm not saying it's a bad position, but it's a biased position. So you need to determine for yourself if that's a position you want to support.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good to know. And yeah, like I said, I always do end with advice. So it doesn't have to be about politics or anything like that. If you want it to be, it can be. But any advice that you maybe were given or that you always share with other people.
Absolutely. I don't consider myself wise or I don't consider myself smart. I consider myself someone lived. I think the best piece of advice I was ever given, I'll give sort of three pieces of advice. And this isn't politically related. This is just, I think, good, solid advices for a young professional or professional in general. First
Mhm.
and foremost, under listening, and I mean really listening, is key, I think, to any kind of baseline of professional career. And people might say and kind of scoff and say, well, I listen, but I mean listen in the sense of, and like just try and exercise. Next time you're in a conversation with someone, actually listen to what they're saying and think about the actual meaning of what they're getting at. Like, I think in terms of how many times have you, when I'm saying you in a general sense, been talking to somebody and they make a point and you respond and they say that's not what I'm talking about, and then they actually go back on what they said and you realize, oh, I misunderstood the point you were making.
Mhm.
And it's common, right? Because we obviously have our own biases. So we're going to take from things, even if it is an interpersonal conversation, things that relate to us. So I guess listen and really listen, because you learn a lot more by doing that than you ever do by talking, which is a pretty funny thing to say while I'm on a podcast pontificating about something. That's my first piece of advice. And then my second piece of advice really is it's much better to do a couple of things really well than a lot of things okay, which is a hard thing for people that are type A, like I'd say myself and you are, in which
Mhm.
we're doing a lot of stuff. We're always kind of saying yes, being dragged into things, doing little volunteer things for people, assisting, jumping in if somebody needs a hand, and all of that is good. But learning how to say no and not feel guilty about it because you need the time for yourself and do the things you've already committed to well is very important. It's something that I'm learning. I'm not
Yep.
saying later in life because I'm not that old, but I mean later in my life.
Mhm. I
And
relate
it's
to that
tough.
one.
It's tough learning that when you're 28, almost 30, versus if you're a teenager and you're creating those healthy patterns, most uh, healthy boundaries for yourself. So I think that's my, I guess, parting. Well, I said three, but that's really, I guess it's three. I guess it's the listening. I guess it's the don't overcommit, and then it's not being afraid to respect your time.
Yeah. No, I relate to all of that. I think that is beneficial to keep in mind in most situations. But yeah, I think this was a good, like I said, I do want to do more episodes on politics. I know there's a lot of people who want to learn more, and I think this is a good first step to do that. So thank you so much for sharing all that and educating us a little bit.
I don't know if I educate. I definitely said a lot of things. So if you're really interested, listen to this a couple times because you might glean something from it.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Matt, and thanks everyone for listening. I know that I kind of talk about a bunch of different topics on this episode, but obviously, politics affects everything in our lives. It affects how we live as children, it affects our schooling, it affects post secondary, it affects our jobs, it affects the food we eat, and the jobs that we can get, and like the distribution of human rights, which my personal belief is that food, shelter, and water are human rights. And I recently argued with someone about that in my DMs recently. They're also saying that people are sick of being told to care about people they don't know or people that could be bad. And so I try to remember that, like, I truly believe that most people are good and that the way that we vote, like, we're thinking about certain things of how we want the world to be better, but it's really, really hard to try and see where someone's coming from when that's their mindset. And so I definitely just want to learn as much as I possibly can and really spread the word because there's so many people who don't vote at all. And I think that a lot of us do share things and do have all these conversations about the way that we're treated as people, as women, as young people, etc. But you don't really have a right to complain if you don't vote. So, anyways, definitely throughout this year, leading up to the elections in the fall, I will probably be doing some more episodes on this. If there's something that you want to talk about, or if there's like any questions or anything that's overwhelming that you want broken down and clarified. I do have some more people who wanted to come on and talk about certain things. So let me know. You can follow me at Newfound Happy Hour on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. You can find all other episodes. There's over like 35 episodes now, so you can definitely go back and find some other ones. I do usually try to keep it to a happy hour, and I think the advice shared at the end is pretty motivating. Although I will say, when he said to not try and do a bunch of things and to just do a few things really well, uh, I don't know. Is this the Virgo in me again? Like, I don't know if it's like I want to do a bunch of things and I want to do them all well. So, anyway, that's my motivation for today. And instead of using all of this going on as something that's overwhelming, I think it should just make us excited or passionate about the way that things can change. So, anyway, once again, thanks for listening to my rambling. I always feel better after doing this. Yeah, and I welcome all feedback. Episodes usually come out every 2 weeks. Sometimes they don't because I'm busy. So, yeah, see you next time, hopefully in 2 weeks. Have a great weekend.